Our first speaker for tonight, who we are very, very excited to have and who I do not think needs an elaborate introduction, Secretary Pollack.
Okay, so good evening. Everyone in this room is interested in how we can transform transportation, particularly to give people more options for walking, biking, and using transit. But I sit in a unique position to try and affect that change from inside. I'm often asked whether I have a theory or a theme in the work we've been doing at MassDOT and the MBTA for the last 3 years. The answer is yes, and that's what I'm here to talk about tonight. First, we should all remind ourselves how much change really needs to happen. Statewide, about 20% of all trips are made by walking, biking, another 8% by transit, and that seems good, except they're mostly short trips. So if you look at miles, not trips, and miles is what predicts greenhouse gases, over 90% of all miles in the state are driven. So whether you're interested in tackling climate change or changing travel behavior or both, we need transformative change in Massachusetts. So how does change happen? My favorite theory of change comes from the inventor and futurist Buckminster Fuller, who used to tell people to be a trim tab. What did he mean? Trim tabs are small surfaces connected to the trailing edge of a control surface, like a rudder on an ocean liner. How do you change the direction of an enormous ship like the Queen Mary? The rudder itself is too big for any single person to change. The trim tab, however, is small and easy for the captain to shift. Small movements by a trim tab create a low-pressure zone that pulls the rudder around. Buckminster Fuller believed that anyone could act as a trim tab, recognizing the potential downstream changes that would occur through the influence of small but high-leverage actions over time, pointing us in a new direction. When I became secretary, honestly, it kind of felt like turning the Queen Mary to figure out how to change MassDOT and the MBTA and the actions of the 351 cities and towns that control our transportation system. The question was, what would be my trim tabs? One thing I knew, and Governor Baker says all the time, is that people are policy, which is why we have Jackie DeWolf is MassDOT's first Director of Sustainable Mobility, and Michelle Danila as our Complete Streets Engineer, and Pete Sutton in Planning, working on the Bike Ped Plan. More importantly, or as importantly, we have bicycle pedestrian coordinators in each of the 6 highway districts because that's where most of the designing and decision-making really happens. And as Jackie found out when we had NACTO in to do a workshop on designing streets for transit, there is genuine interest throughout MassDOT in doing a better job of designing streets that work for everyone, not just cars. Changing people and culture and expertise is one trim tab for changing my agencies. But I want to spend the rest of my brief time before the music starts talking about another theme that shapes my thinking about how to make transformative and lasting change in the ability of our transportation system to provide more, better, more equitable, and safer travel options. What is that theme? Networks. We know that transportation systems work as networks and fail as networks, yet we tend to focus on projects, not networks. Quite simply, a network is a collection of nodes and links. Nodes are places where trips start and end, like residential neighborhoods or employment centers. Projects usually involve better nodes. Better nodes are important, especially if they're the kind of mobility hubs envisioned by Go Boston 2030. But the reality is, more choices, we need more links. This seems obvious, but we have some transportation networks that aren't really networks. And the reason is they are missing links. In recent years, we've built lots of great pieces of bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure, whether as standalone projects or under the Healthy Transportation Compact, which requires building bicycle and pedestrian facilities into MassDOT roadway projects. But when it comes to bicycle and pedestrian facilities, our networks are missing links. We would never build roads that go nowhere or simply end. If we are serious about walking and biking as travel options, the same needs to be true for sidewalks and bike lanes and multi-use paths. Let's explore a few examples of how we at MassDOT and the T are trying to make better networks. We'll start in Northampton, Massachusetts. Northampton is committed to creating a real bicycle network. Currently, their rail and multi-use trail network is accessible to 70% of their residents, and their goal is to hit 80%. But the network was missing a key link. It was divided by a railroad. The Norwatuck Rail Trail ended on the east side of the railroad, and the other side of the tracks was another part of the rail network. The train tracks are actively used by the Amtrak Vermonter and Pan Am freight trains. So there's an official detour, and you're supposed to go south on Market Street and over to the North Street Railroad underpass and north again on King Street. So guess what actually happens? People cut a hole in the fence and carry their bikes over the active rail tracks. This is known in transportation planning as a desire line. So the solution is what you see on the bottom, a $4.4 million underpass that we just finished that now creates a more than 50-mile network of bicycle trails on both sides. Expensive perhaps for a single project, but a bargain for creating a 50-mile bicycle network. Buses also work or fail in networks, and the MBTA's bus network is currently failing to live up to its potential, even though it carries nearly 400,000 passengers every day. Many of the links in the network are crowded. Many of them are unreliable. We heard at the control board meeting Monday, which was devoted to buses, that when you exclude our 15 high ridership key bus routes and the Silver Line, the on-time performance of the remaining 60% of the system is barely over 50% on time. By this time next year, I am delighted that the MBTA will have in place a comprehensive game plan for fixing each one of its 175 bus routes. One of the tools that will be used in this unprecedented data-driven effort is a new way to assess how a given bus route or link in the network contributes to the success of the entire network. So while the T will be fixing 175 routes, what the planning effort will actually produce is a much, much better network. Now, as most folks in this room know, the pedestrian plan MassDOT is currently preparing is also focused on networks rather than on individual projects. But over 90% of sidewalks in the Commonwealth actually belong to cities and towns, not MassDOT. So we made a mid-course correction and created a much-needed municipal resource guide for walkability. Don't worry, the statewide plan is still coming out. But this way, we'll have multiple tools for improving pedestrian networks at both the local and regional level. Like sidewalks, most streets in Massachusetts are also owned by cities and towns, about 3/4. So the real way to change how those streets accommodate pedestrians, cyclists, and transit users is to change how cities and towns think about their streets. Less than 2 years ago, there were only 14 cities and towns of 351 in the state that had formally adopted a complete streets policy. We designed a technical assistance and funding program with the audacious goal of ultimately getting every one of the 351 cities and towns in Massachusetts to commit to complete streets. And we are well on the way. By year 3 of the program next year, we should have nearly 150 cities and towns with not just complete streets policies, but actual priority plans for where to invest, up from 14 less than 2 years ago. That doesn't come off my time. Indeed, when Smart Growth America in 2016 graded complete streets policies across the nation, over 80% of those that got an A came from one state, our state. This transformation, this trim tab, 2 years, less than $15 million. That's what a trim tab looks like. I hope this gives you some insight into what we're doing at MassDOT and the MBTA. In closing, I need to give a shout out to all the incredible men and women at both agencies who are our most valuable trim tabs, who work hard every day to make our transportation networks better, more sustainable, and more equitable. They and you are why I am so certain that transformative change is not only possible, but happening every day. Thank you.
We're going to shift gears and invite Jay Monty from Everett up to the stage. Woo! We invited Jay before we knew that Everett would be winning this gift from the Barr Foundation because you guys put down an amazing pop-up bus lane that got attention nationally. So tell us how you did it.
Sure. Thank you, Stacy. So again, I'm Jay Monty. I'm the transportation planner for the city of Everett. And we're going to talk about the Everett bus lane for a few minutes. And we've nicknamed it tactical transit, right? It's the idea that we're going to do something that is low cost, flexible, quick, and we can do it on our own. We don't need a huge assistance from the federal government, the state government, all their important partners, of course. Quick snapshot of Everett. If you're not familiar, take a ride out here, visit us. We're 50,000 people crammed into 3.4 square miles. And actually, we're less than that when you discount our harbor area and our industrial area. So we're very densely populated, a large environmental justice community, and we have no rapid transit stations, none. So we have no key bus routes, no subways, no trolleys. So all of our residents rely on the local bus service every day, and that 3-mile trip from Everett into downtown Boston takes 45 minutes most mornings. So in 2015, we partnered with Mass DOT and with consulting firm Nelson Nygaard, and we produced the Everett Transit Action Plan. Now, the title kind of says it all. We were really adamant that what came out of this plan was something actionable, something we could do tomorrow when this plan came out. The date on that plan says November 2016. The bus lane opened in December 2016, about 3 weeks after that plan was official. Took a lot of coordination, and the T was a great partner in this. We began meeting with them, figuring out what roadway widths they needed, what type of notice to their drivers, things like that. I love this service advisory because if you look down in the middle, you'll see may experience early arrivals. I don't know how many service advisories tell you you're going to get your bus earlier than you expected. Our DPW crews and our parking enforcement officers were absolutely critical. So the week before we started, we went out with a spray paint can. We marked an X on the road where every single cone, there were about 300 or 400 of them, would go on the road. This way, when the crews came out, it was easy and quick to drop the cones. And if a cone got knocked over, if it got pushed aside, it was easy and quick to flip it back up and put it where it needed to be. And of course, parking. That was the big ticket item here. We eliminated 130 parking spaces during peak hour. And I'll explain a little bit more about why that wasn't as hard as it seemed. But we did have 3 or 4 parking enforcement officers out there all 4 hours, and today we have a single officer that spends her entire time enforcing the lane every morning. Public relations was key to this as well. So we have a great communications department in the city of Everett. They reached out to TV stations, newspapers, magazines, everybody to get some positive reinforcement to our residents, positive enforcement to our region, to really make people feel that this was important, that it was positive, that we were going in the right direction. And then I'm happy to say that this fall we made it permanent. So the cones are no longer. We have paint, and we have red color down the lane, and we even have a bike lane as a part of it now as well. And this is as of about a month ago we finished the paint. So what are the big takeaways, right? One of the questions I've been asked a number of times is, what was your public process? How many public meetings did you have? How did you reach out to your residents? And the reality was this: we didn't do any of that because the pilot is the public process. So we could have as many meetings as we want, we could have as many surveys and discussions, but the reality is you're not going to find out what the true reaction is until you do it. And we came out, we said we're going to do it for a week. And tell us how you like it. Call us, email us, Facebook us, tell us how it goes. And we had about a dozen complaints. That's it. The car drivers loved it because the buses weren't blocking their path of travel. The bikes loved it because they got essentially a dedicated bike lane in the morning. And the transit riders, of course, loved it as well. We had a few coffee shops and folks who were a little bit stressed about their parking situation, but the mayor was very proactive in asking them for their patience and that people would find other places to park, they would come back. Next, utilize your existing practices, right? So, believe it or not, we take parking away once or twice a week in these same hours to sweep the street. So this isn't a big lift, really, to say we're going to do it 5 days a week instead of 1 or 2. We do it, our parking enforcement is familiar with it, our police are familiar with it, our residents are familiar with it. They know where to park when they can't park in the bus lane. Next, don't expect perfection. We have curb bump outs, we have schools, we have funeral homes, we have coffee shops. These are all reasons I've heard that this wasn't going to work, but it worked. The bus drivers are trained, they know how to navigate these situations, they're going to be fine. Perception is as important as reality. So one of the great things that the T and MassDOT did for us was they surveyed the riders in that first week. And believe it or not, the time they thought they were saving was about double the time that they were actually saving. So we shaved time by about 20%, which was about 2 or 3 minutes. They thought they were saving 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 minutes. So for them, this was huge. They loved it. And as I said before, even the vehicles on the street, the drivers, they thought they were making better time down Broadway every morning. Were they really? Probably not. But they felt, since the bus wasn't in their way anymore, it was a benefit. So perception is key here. And don't, take credit for your fringe benefits to your other modes. The bike lane was a benefit we got. Now every morning, we have buses every 6 or 8 minutes. That leaves a pretty big gap for, for bikes to come in and not be worried that they're going to get run down by a bus and essentially protected from traffic as a result. So that's been a huge benefit. And last but not least, and probably the most important, is enforcement. I've gone out a couple of times to watch our parking enforcement officer, and she is a hero. She jumps on hoods, she writes tickets faster than you can blink your eye, and she does it every day, day in and day out, and I'm sure there's people that are threatening her and yelling at her, but she does this without complaint. And the reality is, without the enforcement, you won't have a bus lane. So where are we going? And of course, we're very thankful to the Bar Foundation to awarding us the grant. But here's where we're going next. We are going to put signal priority in next. And when you have a bus lane, a dedicated bus lane, this is actually pretty easy because all you need is vehicle detection. You don't need fancy GPS. You don't need to track the buses. If the only vehicles in the lane are the bus, you just need to detect the vehicle. So we're going to roll that out hopefully in the spring. It's already in design. Howard Sten Hudson is our design firm who's helping us out with that. We're improving the stops. So as we mentioned, we're going to put in the level boarding platforms, and we're going to consolidate some stops as well. We're also in receipt of a grant to expand into Lower Broadway, and Lower Broadway is a little tougher. It's going to require actually widening the road. We don't have a parking lane to take, but that's on our radar. Hopefully, the next 3 to 5 years, we'll be able to do that as well. And cooperation with our state partners. Our bus lane ends in a state roadway, the biggest choke point in the corridor. So it's important that we coordinate and work with MassDOT to find solutions to that as well. So if you haven't been out to visit us, please come out, take a ride. It's a nice, smooth bus ride every morning. And talk to the riders if you're thinking about doing this in your community. They have a lot to tell you as to how well it works, the challenges, and all that. So thank you very much.
Tiffany is an incredible community partner, and she's going to tell you a little bit about her community. But what I thought would be interesting and helpful is to not just talk about the what does a bike lane look like, or what does a bus lane look like, but who. These projects are successful because of the community. So Tiffany is going to share a little bit about why Codman Square was the right place to pilot the neighborhood slow zones in the city of Boston.
Good evening, everyone. So, I'm Tiffany. Can everyone hear me? All right. So, I'm from TNT. That's Talbot, Norfolk, Triangle. And we are a very small neighborhood located in Codman Square. And here is what we look like. And these are some of the statistics that describe what our neighborhood is, represents, and looks like. And if you start from the top and go down, some of those statistics may not be very positive. But when you look at our community as a whole, you see that we're, as we call it, very lit, and we have a lot of resources and talents within our neighborhood. And the last one I saved, we are Boston's first and only eco-innovation district. So this is a representation of how we roll in our neighborhood. Slow rolls, and we get veggie people from neighboring communities, our sister HCC community of Mattapan Food and Fitness. This was a part of the Healthy Community Champion program. It helped us to align what we wanted to implement in our neighborhood, which were slower streets. It helped us to bring an awareness of what was active transportation and how would we engage neighbors for them to take ownership of that implementation and that dream of making our streets safer, and open up a space for them to be able to feel comfortable in expressing their viewpoints, their concerns, but also what they thought were good solutions for the problem. After all, they live there, so they're the experts in the neighborhood. listening to neighbors. So what were the challenges of our neighborhood as seen by neighbors? And that's something that is very important when we're talking about converging into people's neighborhoods, especially neighborhoods that are considered to be underserved or under-resourced. Those two words, not very positive terms, but what we choose to describe neighborhoods like ours, because there is a lack of resources and there is a lack of knowledge about infrastructure and the different processes in order to make neighborhoods better. So this is a little bit of what we do. We get bikes fixed. We have dental vans come into our neighborhood and check the kids' teeth out. And as a reward, we have them get a free bike. And we fit them with helmets and bike lights and all the doodads that go along with the bike to make it really awesome and cool. We work with the Fairmont Greenway Task Force. Our neighborhood is a part of that. We sit on that task force, and we were able to engage neighbors to put the first mural in Dorchester, and all of Boston actually, in front of Elmhurst Park. So that's a mural on Elmhurst Street. It kind of anchors the park, but it also, hopefully, what we were really hoping, and it actually did work out, was a traffic calming measure. It beautified the area, it anchored Elmhurst Park. That's actually also where we have a free drop-in community camp for young children in the neighborhood every single day in the summertime for free. Parents don't have to register, they just drop them off, sign them up, and peace, they get to go. So our neighborhood was really grateful and excited to be chosen for this pilot for the Slow Streets. It didn't just happen overnight. We had a history of being engaged, of listening to neighbors, knowing our neighbors. Not many neighborhoods that look like ours and have the challenges that our neighborhood has knows a neighbor. I know my neighbor's email, I can text them, I can knock on their door, they can come ask me for a cup of sugar, or because I like to cook, what are you cooking? Feed me and my family. And that's a wonderful thing. But when you have a neighborhood that is so connected, it's easier to get people involved and say, come out, let's figure out where a speed bump should be. And let's learn about what a chicane is and daylighting. And let's talk about the fact that maybe there won't be so many extra parking spaces, but what we're gonna get in return. This was last year, our little neighborhood won the Golden Shoe Award from Walk Boston. And all of the neighbors engaged, and that's Paul Malcolm. It's a quote from Paul Malcolm. He is the executive director for the Boston Project. It's a neighborhood ministry that really stewards change in our neighborhood. And of course, talking about slow streets and the need for slow streets, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about why neighborhoods like ours need slow streets. So I'm sure you can see the ghost spike there. Unfortunately, our neighborhood is one of those neighborhoods that have the least amount of infrastructure changes until we were able to have slow streets come in and the city work with us to get these changes made. Our neighborhood is used as a cut-through. People speed, people don't pay attention to the rules of the road, people are not listening or watching out for children. We have the most children in our neighborhood per household than any other neighborhood in Boston. There are always children crossing the street, playing in the street, and so unfortunately there are a lot of traffic crashes. And so this is the need for slow streets. So I just wanted to really have us really think about that and understand that this program is going to save many lives. It's going to allow people to feel safer on their block, to be able to actually even start to think about, maybe I'll go for a walk, or maybe I'll allow my kids to play outside or cross the street to get to the park, or think about riding a bike. So, thank you.
So I'm going to turn the tables, and we're going to go to another neighborhood, the Longwood area. Who's been to or through the Longwood area? Yeah, so it's not great, but we thought we needed to maybe track and understand what's going on there a little bit better. So Andrew devoted huge portions of his life to figuring it out on the ground, and he's here in 7 minutes to tell you how we're gonna fix the Longwood area. Welcome, Andrew.
So, hello. Over the last year, Livable Streets Alliance teamed up with the Longwood area cyclists to do a public engagement campaign in the Longwood area, which is a jam-packed corner of the city. Every day, over 110,000 people travel to the Longwood area, and that's only going to get worse in the coming years. We're going to see 13,000 more jobs by 2030 and 6 million square feet more of development. So your commute's probably going to get worse. And so we're sitting here asking, how are we going to get even more people into these 213 acres of land? So it's probably not going to be a gondola, sorry. I know, sorry. But to figure out how people are getting to the Longwood area today, we put together a multimodal survey, and we started spreading the word. We reached out to our partners in the area, institutions, and we told people, regardless of how they're getting to the Longwood area, to fill out our survey. We trained 13 volunteers who logged over 95 outreach hours. They talked to people on the street for 6 months. They had 3,000 interactions with different people, people biking, walking, taking cars, driving, every different way. From that, we got about 1,500 responses to the survey, people walking, biking, like I said, all different modes of transportation. And we learned some new words for the Longwood area. People have very strong feelings about traveling there, it seems. And some of the new words were a nightmare, hell on earth no matter how you get through it, and my favorite, impenetrable fortress of doom. And as we started looking at all this feedback and all these responses to the survey, we started seeing some patterns, whether it was somebody who was biking from Roxbury, or somebody taking transit from Wellesley, or driving from West Roxbury. A lot of people wanted to see connections in the area. And so, we sat back and we thought, how are we going to do that? So we took a page out of Justin Vivian Bond's book, and we thought, how are we going to find the right circuitry to really make these connections happen? One idea that we have is we need to see better protections for people biking in the area, which is something that we really, really heard from people. Of all the modes, definitely people rated the need for improvement for biking as the strongest. This is according to all survey respondents, so people driving said this even. And that really lined up with how we heard, what we heard from people who were interested in biking but feel like they couldn't brave the streets of the Longwood area. People said that it was scary, they didn't want to mix with traffic, they didn't feel personally safe. In terms of what they wanted to see to get that changed, they wanted to see infrastructure on the roads. They wanted to see protected bike lanes. This is what we heard from people who are walking currently, people who are driving but want to bike, and also from bus riders. They said, protected bike lanes, put them on the road, and I'll bike. And we know that not everyone's going to be able to, bike from their home to the Longwood area, but this will really help out with first mile, last mile connections, getting people from transit hubs like Yawkey or Ruggles or Roxbury Crossing and into the Longwood area itself. Second, we really think that we should be making transit more convenient. And what I mean by that is over a third of people who drive to the Longwood area said they don't want to drive. They said, give me another mode that's more convenient. And the number one mode that they wanted was transit. And there was a really high concentration of people who said that who actually live near transit in communities like Medford, West Roxbury, Brookline. But they said the reason that they don't use it is it's not convenient. And so when we asked them about other factors, if the price of parking went up overnight or if the price of fuel went up overnight, would they still drive? And they said, yeah, probably. What they really wanted was convenience, and they wanted a reliable mode that they know could get them to work or to doctor's appointments or to school. So from that, we think we really need to be prioritizing transit if we're going to have any hope of getting these people out of their cars. That also really lined up with what transit riders were saying. They said, hey, my number one concern is congestion. They really wanted to see less overcrowding on buses. They wanted to see dedicated lanes. Those were the top two requests that bus riders made and shuttle riders. And that also, strangely enough, is what a lot of EMTs told us. They said congestion is getting worse, and it's only going to get worse, and it's going to make it really hard for me to transport patients to the area. So if we try to figure out a way to better prioritize transit in the area, we can definitely encourage new riders. We can also just keep the riders we do have and make them happier. And third, we can improve patient care so that fewer cars are on the street and it's easier for ambulances to get in and out of the area as fast as possible. So some dedicated bus lanes maybe, but also maybe some dedicated ambulance lanes that buses and the ambulances could use. That's one of our ideas that we think that could really help ease congestion and make it a little bit safer and saner in the Longwood area. So in conclusion, the bottom line is, Impenetrable Fortress of Doom does not sound like a place for world-class healthcare, education, and research. If we're going to stand a chance at making people's lives better, we have to make it easy for them to get there and make it safe and sane. So that was a really quick summary, but we have all of our research is coming out. It's going to be online. You can hear from all the different people who travel by different modes, and you can find it on our website, LivableStreets.info. Thanks.
And I do just want to shout out the work of Andrew and our intern, Ashley. Part of our theory of change is getting the information right. So we really felt like we needed to spend a year in the Longwood area with our partners, talking to people and understanding that. But then we don't just create a report and walk away. We're intending on sticking with it, working with the city. We are going to see better bike lanes coming in 2018, which is really exciting. But that's one of dozens of very specific ideas we have. So stay tuned, because we're going to be there implementing some of the strategies that we've brought to you tonight. We've got one more set of speakers before we let you take a break and a breather and talk about what you've learned so far. A few of us got to go to Seattle earlier this year, and we've invited two folks from Transportation for Massachusetts and For a Better City to tell you what our Boston field trip learned in Seattle. And I will say that I'm expecting you guys to also be just as good as everyone else who came up here.
Hey, I'm Kathryn Carlson with A Better City.
I'm Angela Johnson with T for Mass.
And as Stacy mentioned, we are here to talk about Seattle. And Seattle because due to the generosity of the Barr Foundation, thank you very much, we joined about a dozen legislators, advocates, and policy leaders in Seattle in September to learn about what Seattle is doing to address their transportation woes in the face of unprecedented population and economic growth, not dissimilar to what Boston's facing.
Right, Boston and Seattle, they're both facing the same things, rising income inequality, severe traffic congestion that they're also doing their best to work out of. So when we went to Seattle, we came back and we thought about, some of the 6 things that we could bring back to Boston, and the one thing that Seattle unfortunately wasn't able to teach us.
So here we go. First, very quickly, they love ferries. A lot of people get to work via ferries, but you're gonna hear more about this from the incomparable Alice Brown after the break, so we're gonna leave that to her.
But they also love buses, as does everyone in this audience. You all should love buses. But Seattle is very much, they very much love their bus system, and they prioritize their bus system. And when you prioritize your bus system, people will ride it. So the city continuously reinvests in making sure that they have the best bus system that they can provide to their riders. And in fact, in downtown Seattle, 70% of people commute by public transit, walking, and biking. And of that 70%, 47% are commuting via public transit. That means bus and light rail.
This was really important. They work across agencies. What we found in Seattle was that they're very quick and open to piloting things, whether it's a bus rapid transit, whether it's a separated bike lane. they're willing to do this and they're able to do this because they all talk to each other across the local, regional, and state agencies. They trust each other. In fact, a lot of them have worked together in the field over the years and across the various agencies. And that we really found was able to get piloting done, whether it was bus rapid transit or dockless bike share.
And the collaboration keeps going forward, because when we talk about transportation equity, it's never just about transportation. It also goes into how people live their lives. So transportation equity means you must also think about social services, public health, housing, economic development, access. And so SDOT, Seattle Department of Transportation, has created their own transportation equity program that has borne the Orca Lift being an income-based low-income fare for residents who need it, as well as creating their own transportation equity manager who oversees the success of this new program. But when we also talk about equity, that means we also have to tackle some very difficult and sometimes divisive topics, such as congestion pricing, or as we call it, smart tolling.
Which Angela has very kindly given to me to talk about, but this is very exciting. So Seattle has horrible congestion. We know we have some horrible congestion here. They, very similar to us, know that they can't afford or have the space to build their way out of this. So they decided to try to price it and see what they could learn. In 2015, or you can go back. In 2015, very quickly, they started congestion or smart tolling in their high occupancy vehicle lanes. So this is how it works. If you're a bus or you're a 3+ person carpool, you get to use those lanes for no fee. Great. If you are not one of those and you want to opt into those lanes, you can pay a fee. And that fee varies from 75 cents when not many people are using those lanes to $10 when a lot of people want to use those lanes. You can choose, and those prices are updated every 5 minutes based on the traffic conditions. This is what it does. One, it pulls people out of the general purpose lanes who are willing to pay a bit, and therefore frees up space both in the general purpose lanes while utilizing what was underutilized space in the HOV lanes. The third important thing is it raises revenue to actually help maintain these roads and fund innovative programs. So how's it working? Nothing's perfect. Like we said, they love pilots and they're trying this. But the thing that's most exciting for both me and Angela, and hopefully for a lot of you, is that bus ridership in this quarter is up 5% because these buses are moving faster. People are saving 11 to 14 minutes on their commutes, and a lot of people are choosing. They're choosing it maybe 1 time a month, maybe 5 times a month. These are not, some people are using it every day and some people are never using it. 70% of people are choosing to use it when it's most important to them. And perhaps most importantly to some, they've raised $25 million for net investment in maintaining the system and investing in further. So again, it's not perfect, but the support is growing, and they're going to have a final report at the end of this year. We'll see how it looks.
Okay, but Kathryn, that's just
Yes,
Seattle.
Angela.
What about regionally? What's happening regionally?
So importantly, I would like to say that the Seattle region just loves raising taxes on itself, but that's not true. But importantly, they do have regional taxing authority. Yes, we're finishing up very quickly. Seattle region voters, so this is 3 separate counties, 4 major cities, so what we would probably consider the Boston metro area, voted on a $54 billion transportation investment plan, which included almost $30 billion of a tax increase on themselves in the form of sales, vehicle excise, and property taxes. I can see a lot of people shaking their heads, maybe rolling their eyes. I know we think that's not possible here, and it does take a collaborative effort. Behind this effort was the business community, it was the environmental community, it was the labor community, it was the transportation advocates all coming together to say, transportation investment is really important in our region. We all have to figure this out together, and we all have to probably pay a little bit to make it happen. And they did it. They won, and they're investing in light rail and express bus service over the next 10 years with this $50+ billion.
So that brings us now to the one thing Seattle was unable to really prepare us for, and that is
dun, dun, dun.
Amazon. Raise your hand if you are absolutely tired of hearing about Amazon. Thank you, I'm so done. But Amazon isn't done, because in 2018, they will make a choice. We may be that choice. And if we are that choice, what does this mean for our transportation system, how will the Blue Line survive? We're actually not that quite sure, because with Amazon in Seattle, Amazon grew into what it is today with Seattle. Currently, 1,000 people per day are moving to Seattle. But in Boston, 740 people are moving here right now. So what would that mean for our, unfortunately, rather distressed system if we were to have, as they say, 50,000 people, 50,000 jobs coming along Suffolk Downs? This is not necessarily a bad thing or a good thing. We just don't know. So, in short, Seattle has taught us how to, think strategically about ferries, holistically about equity, critically about smarter tolling, regionally about partnerships, actively about pilots. But how to take on mega companies like Amazon, you'll have to see next year. Thank you.
But for now, I want to turn it to two of my favorite folks from the city of Boston, Stephanie and Najah. You've all heard amazing, wonderful, positive things about the Neighborhood Slow Streets program. I've literally never heard someone say something bad about it. That doesn't happen in city stuff. People love this program. The biggest problem with this program is that we all want more of it. So we wanted them to tell you the story about how they get it done. Ladies, welcome.
And we're here today to talk to you about Neighborhood Slow Streets, which is part of our Vision Zero program.
Vision Zero is a priority in the city of Boston because it is so personal. So many people in the city, including Mayor Walsh, have felt the impacts of traffic violence on their lives. And so we are working really hard to bring down the number of fatalities and traffic crashes that result in injuries to zero by 2030.
So we're working at various scales on large streets like Mass Ave, which was a Vision Zero priority corridor, and on local streets like Southern Ave in Dorchester, which is part of the TNT community.
Commissioner Fiandaca tasked us with not only creating a program that would improve safety, but one that would bring a lot of quality of life benefits to the residents of Boston.
And we know that everyone deserves better streets.
And almost everyone wants them.
And so we've been charged by the commissioner to develop a program that helps to deliver better streets to the people of Boston.
So you may be in your house or your apartment or wherever you live and notice maybe some droppings, some of the food in your kitchen is going away, you might hear some squeaking or some sounds in the walls, and you might be concerned that there's a mouse or perhaps several of them in your house. And you'll spend a lot of time trying to figure that out and get that mouse to leave. But you may miss the fact that there are a whole bunch of termites down in your basement who are eating your foundation. And so you will be perhaps mouse-free, but you will also be house-free. That's a good joke. Came up with it right here. Here's an example here in Boston of what happens if you only pay attention to those issues that you hear about. With 311 requests for sidewalk repair, we can see that a lot of them are concentrated in a very specific area of the city that you might also associate with wealth and whiteness. However, when we do a more objective analysis of our sidewalk conditions, the needs are greater in other parts of the city than in that specific area. So we know that if you only listen to those issues, you're going to miss those more pressing needs that happen. Najah.
Yes.
You're a smart lady.
Very smart.
It's true. So you know how to bend space and time.
I can fold this skirt, but other than that, not quite yet.
Well, that really stinks for us because we have to start somewhere. And so to start somewhere, that means we have to prioritize those places that need it the most and the people who are most willing to collaborate with us on bringing results fast. And when we work with communities, there are a few approaches. This says two, but I think there are probably more. One is should be like our friend Bob, who likes to go to communities and tell them what is best for them and then make it happen no matter what. You get kicked out of your house? I don't care. I'm building a highway. That's our friend Bob. Unfortunately, this isn't the way that we do business, perhaps for some people. However, I think for the majority of people, it's really great that instead we spend more time listening to the people of Boston. We ask them, please invite us to your meetings. We want to hear from you. We want to know what your challenges are. And we definitely want to eat that cake that whoever in TNT makes that cake, that is amazing cake. You should go to their meetings and eat their cake. So we like to work with our communities. And that's why our process begins with an application. We ask communities to self-nominate themselves to be part of this process. That means they're involved at the very beginning, they are engaged every step of the way, they know what's gonna come, and they're ready and happy to work with us. Sometimes less happy than other times.
We are well aware of the fact that some communities have been organizing for decades and are ready and prepared to put together ginormous application packets. Other communities may have organized in the last year. And so we need to be cognizant of that and be respectful of that in our application process.
So we maintain a low barrier to entry to this program. We asked for 4 things, that's it, just 4 things. You may be confused because it's a very large pile of papers. We only asked for 4 things. 1,
the contact info.
2,
A map.
3,
A list of concerns.
and 4.
A show of community support.
That's it, just 4 things. That's all we want from everyone before they can participate in this program. We take it from there. And by we, I mean Najah. We were also charged by our commissioner to come up with a process that was really intentionally focused on those people who are the most vulnerable and those places that need it the most. And so Najah, spent a lot of time looking at data and creating maps. And some of the things that we mapped were
where children and older adults are because they are our most vulnerable people, where people are walking and biking because those are vulnerable mode choices, where there are schools, parks, community centers where people might be walking or biking to and from, and also where we have a history of crashes because we understand that in those places, that's probably where the most need is.
right. And we told people this ahead of time, that this is how we were going to select communities. If you meet these kinds of criteria, you're likely to be selected. And we followed through on that promise. We did all of that work. Najah did all of that work. And then we posted the full methodology online. Lots of beautiful maps, lots of beautiful graphs. You can find out information about so many neighborhoods in the city because of this process. We also created score sheets for all 47 neighborhoods that applied, so they would know what kind of information we were looking at, how we evaluated it, and how they stack up against other communities in Boston, so they have a sense of like where they might be in terms of their need.
We also have been working with a large team to make this process go from just an idea into the ground. So it starts with the community, the people of Boston. We work with our leaders to really develop a vision. We work with the people who've been elected to our council, right. The people who work with our constituents every day, the people who manage our money.
And that guy is way back here.
The people who design and engineer the plans for our streets, and the people who build them.
Right, and together we have made a lot of progress. We've tripled the number of speed humps in the city of Boston in a very short period of time. I guess shout out to whoever managed to get those 3 speed humps on Elliott Street and JP sometime in the 90s. That's where this started. And that's where we are today. 2 years ago, we didn't have any neighborhood slow streets program. We didn't have a process for responding to traffic calming requests. We moved into 2 pilot communities that are now in construction. We have 5 more who are beginning in planning, and we're inviting more to join us in 2018 when we release our application process again.
Bye.
I would just like to shout out that this is the only place I have ever been where someone says, we put 3 times the speed humps in the last year, and everyone cheered. There are so many other things we could be cheering about, guys, but we are a transportation group. So we're going to hop across the river, and we're going to spend some time in Cambridge, and by that I mean 7 minutes in Cambridge. And we wanted to give you both the city perspective, but then talk to some advocates. The last couple of years have been transformational in Cambridge. There's been great city leadership in Cambridge, but what's been really impressive is working side by side with a grassroots effort that has mobilized hundreds, if not thousands, of people to bring better biking infrastructure to Cambridge, and they're doing a great job. So we wanted to give them a little time so that you guys could hear more and learn about how they're changing their community. So Annie and Mark, welcome to the stage.
This is a group that formed in response to a bicycle crash and fatality in Inman Square in June 2016. Our mission is to urge the city to build safer bike infrastructure in the form of a network of protected bike lanes. So who are we? We are all volunteers. We are primarily residents of Cambridge, although we have members from Somerville and Medford. We're lucky enough to have people who are very good at public relations, social media campaigns, technical people who can build our website, digital content, do GIS mapping, graphic design, and data analysis of crash data. And the one thing we have in common is a deep passion for this important safety issue. So what do we want? Our goals are, because it's an important safety issue, we'd like to see this network implemented on as aggressive a time frame as possible. We also urge the city to remain committed to its Vision Zero goals of zero traffic fatalities. And finally, full integration of the bike plan network on all major arterial routes in the city. All right, so now I'll let Annie talk about some of the achievements.
Other one, cool. All right, so our first big moment happened in October of last year when we delivered a petition to the city council that called for safe infrastructure on all major city streets. And this did two things for us, really. It first showed the city council that there was broad support for bike safety, and it also was our biggest growth spurt. We got a lot of contact info that we've been using since in our organizing efforts. And after the petition, the city came back and told us that they weren't really planning to do anything until the spring, which was unacceptable to us because we had suffered two tragedies very recently and wanted to see something tangible that would make the streets safer. And so we went back to the city council, and more policy orders are passed, and we got these two pilot lanes that you see here. And also what we did was encourage our members to send a thank you email for those, because we had been on the council's case and the city's case for a while. That something positive was also very effective and appreciated. Several months later, we got the Cambridge Street bike lane, or not we, but the city installed it. It went from Harvard Square to Inman Square. And a few of the key points there were we canvassed for the first time. We went, because we knew that the city tends to listen to residents who live around the project areas usually. So we wanted to make sure that people who supported the bike lanes showed up to the meetings and wrote in. Another key point was the proximity to the high school and the existence of a student bike advocate group. They even did things like go around and count the number of bikes in the bike racks during a school day. And at that point, it was over 200. Now it's over 300. Now the lanes are in. And that just shows, yeah, right? And that shows, the dire need for students to be able to get to and from school safely. And lastly, we had a local business raffle after the lanes were installed to sort of just to encourage people to go to the lanes, or the businesses on the lanes, and to show that, bikers shop too. And next was the city council election that happened just a month ago. It was very important because a third of the incumbents were were not running again, which was unusual in Cambridge. And also after the Cambridge Street lane went in, as well as some other projects, an opposition was starting to form and was growing more vocal and organized. So it was really important for us to elect a bike-friendly council that would help further our progress. And actually, just want to point out, those are two counselors at our Cambridge Street celebration, Jan Devereaux and Mark McGovern. It's a great picture. Yeah. And so a key part of our strategy was our platform. And we decided on this because in Cambridge there were 26 different candidates. So we didn't want to limit ourselves to just a few. We wanted a table like this that one of our amazing graphic designers put together, but that showed that how the candidates stood on putting in a protected network. And to create the platform, one of the volunteers used GIS to measure the number of miles in the city's bike plan and compared it to the number of miles that were already completed. And from there, we sort of built we calculated the number of miles that were needed to be done each year to have the network completed in 5 years. So we sort of tried to make it aggressive and then also base it in some data. Some other strategies were making sure people registered to vote. We talked to the various candidates to see whether or not they'd be a champion for bike safety, and we also called and texted people right before the election to make sure they knew about the candidates and were going to vote. Now back to Mark to talk about some of the pushback we've been receiving.
All right, and so as you can imagine, there were some members of the community who were opposed to the infrastructure changes. It was mainly led by a powerful business association and a local pharmacist. And we found, unfortunately, they were spreading a good bit of misinformation and confusion about the process, claims about the process not being slow enough or inclusive, problems with emergency vehicles, street cleaning, snow removal, but we believe the city has already thought about, if not addressed, most all these issues. And then we saw an independent extra governmental commission form with the name, nice sounding, Safe Streets for All, that has as a goal to remove some of this infrastructure. So in response, we just created some materials that were myth-busting counterpoints to counter that narrative. And so next steps, what are we doing next? We're continuing to build coalition, greater outreach to new city councilors to keep them engaged and informed, and talking to local businesses who recognize the benefits for safe bike routes for employees and customers. Trying to grow our base with new members because all this outreach takes a lot of time, and also talking to senior groups and affordable housing. So finally, I would invite you to look at our website, cambridgebikesafety.org, if you want to get involved. Thank you for listening, and ride safe.
One thing that I want to flag is they talked a little bit about how they use their candidate questionnaire. The Vision Zero Coalition, that involves many, many, many organizations that are in the room, created a questionnaire, and we had about a 70% response rate from possible candidates, which is incredibly high for a questionnaire. And there were some really great communities that took that information, like Cambridge. Our friends at Streets PAC used it in Boston and really influenced the elected officials that came to the table. And we've been able to use the great advocacy from groups like this to make sure that all of our elected officials care about these issues and are championing them. So thank you. So we're gonna take a little bit of a different spin. What you see, we've been sort of going back and forth between a municipal perspective and then a community perspective where you can see both sides. But there's a lot that happens on our streets that has nothing to do with the bike lane, that has nothing to do with the bus, but that creates sort of the vibrant ecosystem that breaks down those invisible barriers. And I heard about Tran's great work, and we did at Livable Streets, and we thought we need to highlight this for our community because her work is maybe different day to day than what many of us do, but it reflects the kind of Metro Boston that we all want. So welcome.
So my name is Ngoc-Tran Vu, and my presentation is on socially engaged art, and I'll be talking about the power of art for social justice and equity. I wanted to start off by talking about my background because it really informs both my work and also my practice as an artist and organizer. I identify as a 1.5 Vietnamese American, and I came to the US with my family when I was 4 as political refugees. And we grew up in working class Dorchester and South Boston. And this is really important because my work right now is embedded in my community and the people there. And also the waves of Vietnamese refugees in the US, starting in the 70s, and how we came to be in the Dorchester area, keeping in mind the background of immigrants and refugees who are there. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that I believe everyone is an artist, is whether or not we choose to use our creativity. And art is a human right. And I think that when it comes to art and culture, that is really the root and heart of how we engage as humans. So when our stories, our narratives are not told, what happens? And particularly where we live right now in a society in a very divisive time. So what is socially engaged art? Essentially, it's creative projects designed to engage, disrupt, or challenge the status quo, particularly in our society today. Socially engaged art is also a form of community organizing, rooted in collaboration and network. So whenever we talk about collaboration and community, we're essentially talking about social engagement and how we connect with the people that we work with and also our communities. Socially engaged art also has the power to express, to heal, to build and envision. And especially the role of the artist and also creativity is to envision the alternative and the possibility to our society and our culture. So really this is really the heart of social engagement. So I wanted to share 2 examples of my art practice. Most recently is the Community in Action, a mural for the Vietnamese people that was unveiled on October 1st in Fields Corner. I invite you all to come visit. It's a permanent mural, and we collaborated with the Pho Hoa Vietnamese restaurant to really be embedded in the community. And the project was tremendously successful because it involved community collaboration. So I was able to recruit a group of young artists, myself included, and also a steering committee made up of local residents. It was literally a form of community organizing because I went door to door, I knocked on people's door, got to know my neighbors, let them know that this project is happening right down their street, and to really bring people into the process and make it very transparent as much as possible, to include materials that's in different languages, rooted in the community, and really to involve people in the process. And all of this was done, people volunteered their time. It was really tremendous, and it really was so heartwarming because people cared so much about the project. They wanted to activate the neighborhood. They saw a need for more art and for more engagement. I also wanted to mention that the project was from the New England Foundation for the Arts Creative City. And so these are example of art project that's really rooted in community and that is accessible so that people can participate. So we met for months at a time. I met weekly with the young artists, with the steering committee members, and we really made this so that people can really participate, and that is really from the ground up and from the people themselves. And so we also begin to make a digital collection too, so whenever people come by and visit, they can use the hashtag #VietStoriesMural and also .community, so that both highlights it, and make it accessible for the community and also visitors to come by. Another project that's ongoing right now is the Dorchester Not For Sale, which is a group of engaged residents who's worry about all the development and gentrification that's going on in Dorchester and really throughout the city. So this past week we had our first public action where we disrupted a BPDA meeting, and we were able to organize residents together intergenerationally, folks who spoke different languages, the Vietnamese community, the Cape Verdean, Latino working class, and we really, we were demanding development without displacement. We wanted to have a real community process with real decision-making power and to be at the table. And we made this process inclusive, accessible. We outreached to people. We provided transportation. We provided meals. We made sure to let people know what was going on, and to let this process be as accessible as possible. So the picture on the left is of the action that that went on. We started speaking in different languages. We had our own interpretation, and on the right was kind of a parallel process that we've been meeting since the summer, just to let people know all this development that's going on. So what is all of this, like in terms of, using the art as a platform for social engagement? How does it fit into other types of, community engagement? And these are some guiding questions that I find to be very helpful, especially when thinking about projects that I'm engaging in. So what are the intention of the projects? What is, the goal? What is the objective? Who is this for? And who's really behind it in terms of funding, in terms of decision-making power, who's really at that, and what are the narratives that's being shared, what is being uplifted and reversed, what's not. who's really at the table, at the decision-making table. If you look at the, at the meetings you're at, you can, pretty tell right away who are the people that are there, and really who's not and who should be there are the people who are most impacted. Do they have a voice? Do they have a real voice? And how can this be more an inclusive and accessible process? And don't kid yourself. You really have to answer these questions for real, and not just to feel like you're checking off a checkbox, but really, is this a really true process? And then lastly, are we healing ourselves and one another through this process? Because really that is the root of a lot of things that we're engaging in, is to unite people, to bring people closer together, to really build a better world for ourselves. So I wanted to end this with a proverb, African proverb, that really talks to the heart of narrative and really who's in control. If the lion does not tell his story, the hunter will. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tran. I love your work and I love your project. And I hope everyone is beginning to see some themes. I think we're seeing both. We need our friends in the cities and towns, and we also need really, really, really actively engaged communities. And if we don't have folks who are willing to stick with projects, sometimes for decades, hint, hint, this is a theme coming up next, they're not going to happen. And so I hope it's inspiring you all to think about the project in your backyard, the thing that you want to see done, and how you are going to get involved, and then pick 2 other projects to help with each other tonight. So we have a couple of just 2 talks left. We have our last team talk for the night, and we wanted to bring you one of our Greenway stories. And it's really not our story, it's a story of a couple of communities, Mattapan and Milton, and their efforts to bring a greenway to their community along the Neponset. So I'm going to invite Vivian and Lee to the stage.
Okay, I'm Vivian, and I live in Mattapan, and this is my friend Lee, and he lives in Milton. At this point, you guys are supposed to go, ooh, all right? So we're here to talk to you about an awesome project that has brought us together as friends, as neighbors, and how the privileged, racist voices of a very small group of people have offered us now an opportunity to bring all of Boston to this absolutely beautiful space, which is the Neponset River. So I am going to let Lee take off first because he's going to talk about the history, and then I'll interrupt throughout.
Thank you, Vivian. Okay, so the first view that we have here is a little bit of history. This rail line was built 170 years ago and opened 170 years ago this week. And it actually today is what the Neponset River Greenway runs on. Back in the day, industry followed the river upstream, and eventually a whole network of trolley lines were built to connect all the neighborhoods together, including both Mattapan and Milton. Eventually times changed, as you know, in the post-war era. There was the white flight out of the city, so that transformed the whole nature of the communities and ended up setting up the racial and socioeconomic tension that we know today. The Greenway Council was founded in the 1990s to advocate for better river access. The council includes dedicated advocates from each of the communities, and it convenes with a DCR representative on the first Wednesday of each month, which would be tomorrow.
Tomorrow night we'll be meeting at the Foley in Mattapan. When I started going to this group, I spoke English, but I didn't speak the same language because they have been working on this project for such a long time. I'm a desert girl, so I don't really know a lot about rivers and things. Lee was always my partner that at the end of the meetings I'd said, I didn't understand what they were talking about, fill me in. But one thing that was really, really important, that from the onset of this project, Mattapan hadn't been as well represented as it should have been. It was a project that took a very long time to get going. And I was adamant from the beginning that I wanted to see other folks from my neighborhood participating in this process. It wasn't easy, but it was something that I was determined to do.
So DCR presented, or actually it was MDC at the time, developed a master plan and presented it to the different communities along the river. And there was a lot of negative feedback from certain very vocal people, primarily in Milton. There were some people in favor, but they were less outspoken, and they were generally outshouted at the meetings. The Boston Natural Areas Network helped to secure grants to buy the land and fund the cleanup of the dump and build the first trail segment, which you can see opened in 2002 on the eastern segment of the river. This map is one part of Livable Streets Emerald Network Plan. And if you take a look, it really connects a whole bunch of communities throughout the greater Boston area together. So we've been trying to connect our segments together to play our role in connecting those. If you can go back to that for just a second. You can see that we have a gap in the middle here. We built a section in 2010 and opened that, and another section in 2015, and it's the section in the middle that we're going to focus on in our discussion here. So,
now,
how many of you have done the long version of Hub on Wheels? Okay, so you've done this section. It's a beautiful view. And it ended up with a dead end here.
Which is the section now that was just most recently opened. And when I first moved to Mattapan, I never understood why it was that it dead ended there. You could walk from Dorchester, but then we would get to the area that was nearest my home, and I would have to walk out onto the street on River Street. And why was that?
It's because of the opposition from Milton. So MDC and DCR focused on building those other segments that we saw on the map there. And they opened the next segment in 2010, connecting to Hyde Park, 2015, further out into Hyde Park and Milton, and another section in 2017, connecting across Blue Hill Avenue. And let's return back to that open gap in the middle there. So in 2011, DCR came up with 5 different options to try and appease the abutters as best they could. You can see a listing here showing the different rows. The abutters are listed in the middle, and the votes in favor of each of the options, the votes against each option, and the net balance between the two. And you can see just how few people it took to influence the outcome of the trail construction.
This was a project obviously put together by Lee. But just notice how 32 people were the ones that made this decision. Just that small group of folks were the ones that voted to have the Greenway laid out the way it is now. So we're very thankful, those of us that live in Mattapan, to those 32 people at that very loud vocal meeting that took place in Mattapan in 2011, because they now offered us in Mattapan 5 different direct access points to the Greenway, where they, the residents of Milton, only have 2. So we're very thankful to the folks from Milton on voting for us.
But it got built.
This is what the Greenway looked like before construction. This was an actual walk that we did, trying to get our neighbors to become much more engaged. So this is what it looked like beforehand. Stacy's staring us down, so we'll continue. The project, the groundbreaking took place in December 2014. You can see how cold it is. It was 2 weeks later when Deval Patrick left office and Governor Baker came in, so this was one of the very last decisions that Governor Patrick did. He wanted to make sure that there was enough money to fund the project. Not a lot of community members were there because, as most of these ceremonies, it was like 10 o'clock in the morning on a Thursday. So soon after that, the construction started, and we, because of the fact that we were involved in the Rompanzit River Greenway and we had brought in some other folks from Mattapan, and we had a great working relationship, as we still do, with the folks from DCR, when it came to meeting and letting us know, we were invited to come out that morning on a Saturday morning, pretty cold, and waited for 4 hours for them to lift that canopy walk over the MBTA, which was another reason. It wasn't only the folks in Milton that delayed the process. It was also the funding and the fact that the MBTA and DCR had to come together on a way to be able to have the path go over the trolley tracks. Here's trail construction. Here, I just want to go back. Picture number 1, bike number 2, bike number 3, all right? Lee's bikes. He would be very creative in figuring out ways to be able to get a much more close and up-close view of what was going on. I, on the other hand, was taking pictures through the fence off of River Street. Beautiful, the bridge at night. This is when Lee and I did our own little tour of the Greenway, just to make sure that the asphalt had been laid down well. Right. See, I'm actually looking in the other direction because I didn't want folks to see me. But anyway, it was a lot of fun. Trail opened on May 19th, was really, really excited. I got the text to say from DCR that the trail was open. As soon as it opened, people started coming from everywhere. It's absolutely beautiful. If you haven't come, Stacy's doing the All Right Cut It. One ride, bike party at night, beautiful view. River has a lot of problems. Lee's just going to finish it off with a couple of things that we can all do to get involved to make sure that the river is in a better condition.
Next slide. We still have lots to do. We have 2 cleanups every year. Next slide. And 1 more gap that we need your help to close in Dorchester. So you can find us online and ask us any questions you want there.
Thank you.
Loved about this story was that they really wanted to present together because consistently what we hear over and over and over again is that the way that we build our streets and our trails, we put up invisible barriers between communities. And there was a barrier between Mattapan and Milton, and it's important that these guys came together and shared together. So thank you. All right, we have our closing speaker. It's Alice Brown. She's a fan favorite. Do not disappoint tonight, Alice. Do not sass me. Welcome. She's going to talk about boats.
Good evening, everyone. I like to start with surveys. So I'm going to ask you to raise your hand if you like ferries. Yeah, ferries. No, keep them up, keep them up. Keep your hands up if you have ridden any ferry anywhere in the world in the last year. Keep them up. Keep them up if you've ridden a ferry in Boston Harbor in the last 6 months. Keep your hand up if you commute by boat on a regular basis. 4? 3? That's a lie, Josh Ostroff. I'll give you 3. I know Nathan's here somewhere. That gap between the people's love of ferries and their appeal as a way to travel, the fact that you can have a drink in your hand and the wind in your hair and you're riding across the water, and the current awareness and ridership of Boston ferries is something I am trying to close. In order to close that gap, I'm working at Boston Harbor now with these partners, so MassDOT and Massport are 2 of our biggest funders, but we're also working with the National Park Service, the Seaport Economic Council, the Convention Center Authority, as well as 2 awesome foundations, including the Barr Foundation, and 2 developers who are really committed to this work. Today in Boston Harbor, there are 3 MBTA ferry routes. They run 76 trips a day. These are bad numbers. 76 trips a day, and they have about 1.5 million passenger trips per year. So it's nothing compared to the full MBTA, but it's pretty incredible in and of itself. In the summer, there are 4 additional commuter ferry routes operated in partnership with individual municipalities. There are 2 private operators that provide ferry service to Provincetown and ferry access to 8 of Boston's harbor islands. In the summer of 2017, you could commute by ferry to Boston from Salem, Lynn, Winthrop, Charlestown, Quincy, Hingham, and Hull. Depending on your origin, the trip would take anywhere from 10 to 65 minutes and would cost between $3.25 and $9.25. But you all didn't raise your hands. You don't commute from those places. So, you should visit. You can take a ferry and walk to see the Peabody Essex Museum in Salem, which has an amazing Chinese house inside. You can take a ferry to Lynn and see the Beyond the Walls mural exhibition, which is incredible. You can go to Charlestown and see the Bunker Hill Monument. Obviously, there are many ways to get to Charlestown. And you can also go to Marina Bay, where you can visit Squantum Point Park or eat at one of the fine restaurants of Marina Bay. And if you have a bicycle, you can take the boat and visit these other wonderful places. The Deer Island Water Treatment Center is surrounded by paths and is also part of the Harbor Island State Parks, National and State Parks. You can visit the infamous Neponset River Greenway. You can go to World's End, which is a trustees of reservation park and also part of the islands, even though it's on a peninsula. And you can go to Fort Revere and Nantasket Beach. And I have dragged people to each and every one of these locations by boat this summer. You can visit 8 of the harbor islands by ferry, and if you go there, you will find beaches, campsites, historic military installations that are surprisingly okay with you climbing on, even though they're crumbling. Delicious blackberries if you visit in August, an incredibly historic lighthouse, and a ropes course on Thompson Island. We think that ferries should serve even more people and do even more for the city of Boston and the surrounding area, and that's why we're working on 2 studies. The first of those is a comprehensive business plan. It will result in 1 to 3 new routes that can be implemented in the next 1 to 5 years. And a strategy for the national parks to improve service to the islands there. The RFP will be issued in the spring or sometime in the summer and start with service in 2019. I'm used to having slides here. It's okay. 2 minutes. I'm at 2. Great. To date, we've studied existing conditions. You can see them on our website. We've got a national best practices report that we're working on, and we've developed site profiles for 30 different docks around the harbor to understand what their potential will be to provide service in the future. Great. And we'll be selecting 12 sites that will be modeling to look at routes. But because I'm working on it, public engagement matters a lot to me, and so we've conducted 3 stakeholder workshops. We held those in July and heard from about 100 people who are passionate about ferries. We did a stated preference survey that's going to help us build a more rigorous transportation model. We got 3,689 responses. Our consultants are not used to having this kind of statistical robustness, even though they work in much larger areas. They were overwhelmed by Boston's enthusiasm. And we had an open house in November where about 150 people came and reviewed all of our draft reports so far and give us a lot of incredible feedback. So like I said, moving forward, we're going to take these 12 sites, we're going to look at routes in between them, say which 3 have the highest ridership potential, and then take it from there. Again, eventually developing these great new routes. And for the Harbor Islands, we're looking at up to 3 new gateway sites. In the interest of time, I'm going to say that we want a system with many more ferries. We care utmost about implementation. We want to make sure that these are eventually implemented, and to do that, we need your help. You don't necessarily need to be the person who's figuring out the route modeling for us. What we want your help with is designing complete streets and communities and path connections so people can walk and bike to ferries. We want you to help with the integration of schedules and fares with local buses. We want you to make sure that wayfinding and placemaking around ferry terminals works for you and other passengers. We're looking for diverse sources of funding, and we want to make sure that you ride the ferries, because that's how you tell them you love them, and it will make your trip happier every time. Thank you.
That's it for our 10 street talks in one evening. I know it's a long night, but how many people feel like you learned something new tonight? Yeah. How many of you feel like you are excited to advocate for or get involved in something that you learned about tonight? We want you to stay involved. We want you to stay engaged. You will for sure get an email from us with a lot of links, and you should click on all of them and get super involved and get super excited.